Hello everyone, welcome. Today I'd like to make a video unlike any video I've ever done before. This is not about computer science. This is about what I believe. For the TLDR crowd, fair enough. Jesus Christ is my Lord, and I believe God raised him from the dead, and he will come and set everything right. But how did I get there? Now, I don't really expect anyone to be watching this video, but just because something's not going to be watched doesn't mean it doesn't need to be said. So my personal journey began when I was raised in an extended family situation in the Southern Baptist Church, and every Sunday I would sit with my grandfather on the right side of the auditorium. And I remember in the second grade, uh, we had a pastor by the name of Pastor Chudy, a Russian name, T.S. something or other. And he was a very good pastor. Respected him a lot. And he also preached really well. So in a Baptist church, there are invitations given at the end of every service. So I'm sitting there with my grandfather at the end of one service, and all of a sudden I had this terror come over me that Pastor Chudy was going to turn to me and ask me to come down. He wasn't a particularly fire and brimstone preacher, and he wasn't doing anything unusual that day, but I was terrified. And so I sat or stood, whatever we were doing, in my spot, and the service ended. And I went, phew, boy, I'm glad that's over. And I went home. Next Sunday, the same thing happened. And this could not go on. So I lived with a great aunt. She was my mom. And I told her, and her response was, well, God is calling you. You need to go forward. So the next Sunday, I'm sitting there thinking, I really don't want to go forward. And so if this doesn't happen again, I'm staying right where I am. Well, it did happen again, and I went forward and I was baptized. Typical Baptist story. And I bring that up because I can't deny that experience. But for the next, I don't know, I was 8 then, so for the next 7 or so years, I was not a bad kid. I was kind of a lazy kid. I didn't do anything either good or bad. So lazy kids tend to be credited with not being bad, I guess. But I had the usual mid-teenage concerns about eternity and truth and what kind of person I was going to be. And to make a longish story shorter, I I decided to read the New Testament. Lots of kids do that. I never really understood the Gospels, and teenagers don't want to read history. So I turned to the table of contents and found the first book that was not a gospel or not a history, and that's the page I turned to. It turns out to be the book of Romans. And Romans made a lot of sense in a very uncomfortable way. But I was still going through it, trying to figure out exactly what things meant. And I made it through to chapter 10, and it said, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And this was simple enough that even I could understand it. I was a pretty arrogant, pseudo-intellectual jerk, and so I thought, well, I've done the confessing part that happened when I was 8, and now do I believe that God raised him from the dead? And this was a pretty big thing. I was, well, can I be a Renaissance man and the measure of all things? And the the um, the weight of being right in those sorts of situations, in all situations, was not going to be something I could sustain. I knew that. So I would either go crazy or had to find something else. And so I thought, well, do I believe God raised him from the dead? And even as a thought experiment, no particular research being done here, I sort of traced the cause and effect back from the church on the corner in America town, back through history. How did those places come to be? And I wound up in that room on Pentecost. And these guys were scared. But something happened. And they went from being scared that they were going to be the next ones put on a cross to going out and pointing their finger and saying, "This Jesus whom you crucified was God's anointed." Why did they do that? Well, when asked, they said he rose from the dead. And they all said that. And people don't die for what they know to be a lie. And these guys were putting their lives on the line for that. So I believe them, that God raised him from the dead. There are some other explanations that you can go through. Much more recently, by a guy by the name of Gary Habermas up at Liberty has done some really jaw-dropping work on proving that, giving historical evidence that Jesus' tomb was empty. Now, empty doesn't imply a resurrection necessarily, but when you start looking at that, there are no good solutions to his tomb being empty. So I believe the apostles, I believe their witness, God did a miracle, which is, okay, dead people stay dead, right? But in this case, God did a miracle. And but then going back to the Jesus is Lord thing is a pretty arrogant pseudo intellectual. That was involving submitting what I thought and what I wanted and what I considered to be important to what the scriptures teach. Jesus and the scriptures, what God thinks, what God wants, what God considers to be important. And that is a pretty tough thing to do when you're as arrogant and self-centered as I was. But that's what I had to swallow. One, because it's true. Two, for my own sanity. I'm not going to go around believing a lie. I'm a Christian because it's true. I guess that's one aspect of being a computer nerd. I believe in truth and false. So that's why I'm a Christian. That's sort of how I came to be here. And again, I don't expect anybody to ever watch this thing, but just because it's not going to be watched doesn't mean it shouldn't be said. So if there is anyone who has stayed with me this long, thank you very much. To God be the glory. Amen.